holotropic breath work, if the person would be, the holotropic breath work would intensify the choking. There would be choking, and then the first experience that comes connected with the choking would be, let's say, near drowning when the person was 7. Then it continues, goes deeper. It becomes a series of episodes when the older brother was choking that person. Then it goes to whooping cough. Then a deeper layer would be choking in the birth canal. And then you can get a past life experience of being hanged or being strangled. So there is a whole, what I call a COEX system, a system of condensed experience. So if we get the biographical part of the story, it seems to make sense, but it would not be the whole story. It would not have the kind of therapeutic impact that we would expect, because there is much more underneath. So we would have an expanded view of what is the material underlying a typical emotional or psychosomatic problem. Now, this looks like very bad news. There's much more there than we thought. But the good news is that you also find new, very powerful, effective mechanisms of healing in non-ordinary states. Let's say reliving birth and integrating that experience can be extremely healing and transformative. I have seen powerful healing happening in connection with past life experience. Again, whatever we think about reincarnation, the past life experience as a phenomenon is a very real thing, however we decide to interpret it. I have seen situations where the healing happens when a powerful archetype, Jungian archetype, is allowed to surface into consciousness. Powerful healing can happen when people have experience of cosmic unity, sort of oneness, dissolving of boundaries, and so on. So we find many new effective therapeutic mechanisms. Then we have the strategy of psychotherapy. Now, if you think about it, we have enormous number of schools of psychotherapy, and they have fundamental disagreement as to how the psyche functions, what are the major motivating forces in the psyche, why symptoms develop, what the symptoms mean, and each therapeutic school gives you a different technique that we use to work with the client. So if I'm a beginning psychiatrist, I look at the market, and then one school starts talking to me. Like for me, it was Freud. Wow, this is where it's at. And then if we are there for a while and it doesn't work for us, we get a training in another school, and there could be a fundamental disagreement between those schools. Now, this cannot be an important factor, because if the conceptual understanding would be a major factor, then one school would have to be closest to truth, and that school would have to get most of the therapeutic results. But the studies that were done show that the therapeutic results are almost equally distributed, and each school has good therapists and bad therapists, and doesn't seem to have a lot of convincing relationship with what the theoretical concept is, what we think we are doing. So some of the studies emphasize that maybe what's important in psychotherapy is the quality of the human encounter between the therapist and the client, or the feeling of the client of being unconditionally accepted by another human being, sometimes for the first time in their life. And the kind of interpretation that we give cannot be the significant part, because that would vary. The interpretation of the same material would vary from school to school. I usually remember something from my own psychoanalysis. I had a psychoanalyst who was a kind of elderly gentleman. He was elderly, he was my age now. And he was, as I mentioned, he was really convinced Freudian. And several of us of the same age were in analysis with him, and once in a while he would fall asleep in analysis, and we would have to do something to try to bring him back into the process. And then besides having our own training, we also had seminars where we could ask questions. And so on one occasion, one of us asked a purely theoretical question: what happens when a psychoanalyst falls asleep? If I continue free associating, does therapy still continue? Is this an interruption of the therapeutic process? Should I get refunded for the period of time when the analyst is dozing off? And So he had to answer it. He couldn't say it wouldn't happen because he knew we knew, so he had to come up with an interpretation of some kind. So he said, yeah, that happens. You know, sometimes you're kind of tired or you're recovering from a flu, so it happens. But when you're in this business for a long time, you develop a kind of sixth sense. You fall asleep only when the stuff that's coming up is irrelevant. He knew a lot about Pavlov, so he did Pavlov's example of the waking point, when you have the cortical inhibition, the waking point. And Pavlov's example is a mother who can sleep through heavy noises, but when the child starts moaning, you know, she wakes up, it's right there. So it's just like the mother, you know, you just wake up and you're right there. So then I realized there was a problem, because what is relevant, what isn't relevant, depends on the kind of training you have, depends on the school. What's relevant for a Freudian is not necessarily relevant for a Jungian or for somebody who's trained by Karen Horney and so on.